Thanks to anybody tuning in late tonight. Just got back. Good event. I got to play trivia.
Presenting
And I
Benny
won.
Goodman and his orchestra.
Alright, here we go. Hey, Martin. And hey, Miles. That's my guy. Evening, Laura, Jean, Paula, and Sharon. Hey, Mom. Out in Atlanta, which is an hour and a half away from Atlanta. Hey, Richard. Hey, Larry and Jeff. Hey, Cindy. Hey, Leah.
Let's dance to a half-hour
Hey,
rhythm
Gene.
by Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
What's up,
The
Priya?
Raja Rhythm, playing for you from the Joseph Urban Room of the
Priya's
Congress Hotel.
meowing at me
in
down
downtown
over
Chicago. Dodging a divorcee, the first number.
here.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Evening, Johann. I am dressed in my business Skeletor gear today. Business Skeletor. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Nancy, Susan, Sarah, Octavio. Hey. All right. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Robert, Pam, Don, Cindy, Richard. Hey, everybody. It's an hour late, so all of a sudden we got a lot of people like, hey, haven't been here in a while. Well, welcome. We're always here, but is 9 o'clock easier for people or what? You Bob. Hey, Susan. Hey, Katie. I am not ready for MysterioCon yet. I gotta sell more tickets. Hey, Diane. Gene, I'm not. This is normally past my bedtime too. Honestly, I've been crashing at like 8:30 lately. Hey, Donna. Hey, Bob. Hey, Marty. Hey, Timothy. I have to go find the book I just went to see the event for. What did I put this thing? Right here? Yeah. Bride of the Tornado by James Kennedy. Old Violence Gang colleague of mine. Place is looking cleaner than usual. On account of I got PBS filming here tomorrow. I love it when they ask to film in my apartment. Hey, Grace in Florida. Hey, Mary, Grace. Hey, everybody.
The divorcee successfully, and we might say rhythmically eluded.
Cats are floating around. Miles is right
The day
here.
I let you get away.
Priya is on the green chair. Who is filming? I don't know, somebody from PBS. What PBS character you are? Clearly, I'm Grover. Right? Natalie, that works. I've never really dove into Twin Peaks. You feel like you need a project. You have to have time for a project. AM support for Allegra? I don't know what that is. Like the medicine? Thanks, Natalie. I hope I get it right today. I realized it's been a long time since I did this one. And I remember I had the structure on it is kind of weird. I went back through it a little bit today and realized, oh man, I did not have sufficient time for this set aside. Good. Well, I didn't realize I was going to have to clean my apartment today. Well, it is 9 here in the correct central time zone. Thanks to everybody showing up. Casey, I know a lot of people who've watched Twin Peaks more times than they can count. Quite a few, in fact. In fact, Bride of the Tornado by James Kennedy is described as Stephen King meets Twin Peaks. How are my sinuses doing? Hey, Jordana. Okay, Haley's mentioned that somebody had seen them at Dragon. Somebody came up to him at Dragon Con. Must have been you. All right. Welcome everybody. I'm Business Skeletor. Hey, Shelby. Oh yeah, Turbing is at 10 a.m. I should probably move that down. Well, that one's wrong too today, so. Hey Judy, welcome back. Seems like we get a lot of people making a comeback today. Well, there's the donate buttons, everybody. Hey Nanette, speaking of. This thing. I got real alert fatigue these days. Every time something dings, I get mad. Unless it's a notification that I just sold some tickets or something. I turned messages. I'm back posting on TikTok a little bit, but I do not have notifications turned on. Welcome along, everybody. I'm fresh from a bookstore event.
Many good Johann is playing for you.
where I won a round of tornado trivia.
In downtown Chicago, and his next tune, Lights Out.
Evening, Jim. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more song, then we'll get started properly. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Judy. Natalie, that's a good way to do it. All right, so I've done a lot more Hoch research since the last time I did this tour, in fact. There's a lot of it done over like January, February. Some of this might even be out of date now. Hey, Gwendolyn. Another mysterious Chicago trivia. Yeah, you guys aren't good at it, though. So, Marita, I am just having some Jepson's bourbon that was aged in a cognac barrel. This stuff is 119 proof. But you guys seem to like it when I do these tours ripped, so that's a harsh lesson for me to learn. I just made it through a bookstore event sober, so. You're good at making crude comments, but everybody was just saying, oh, I'm so bad at this. They're very hard to do, the trivia ones. They're very hard to do, and the numbers on them aren't great. That's the real excuse. Oh, laws, says Leah. Letting Benny Goodman finish up this tune, and we're going to go start. This is a very rich and delicious and caramely cognac-y bourbon. Hey, Matthew. Timothy, it's Barton, and Saul. Really, that's bold of you. I had chili mac tonight. All right, so that wraps up Benny Goodman. Kind of in the mood to just kind of hang out all night, honestly, but I think I should really probably get to work properly. So welcome along, everybody. I'm Business Skeletor from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian around Chicago for going on 20 years now. 20 years now! I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, up to and including Mysterious Chicago, the book. Just Kill Me, which is about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them, and still available at the Chicago History Museum for reasons beyond my knowledge. Smart Alex Guide to American History still has a poster of at Bookseller, also for reasons beyond my knowledge. H.H. Holmes' The True History, Murder Maps USA, and Graceland Cemetery Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, which I just found out is on the Illinois Reads list. It's one of about half a dozen nonfiction books for the year that they will be pushing all over the state. It's pretty cool. I've been on the list before. It entitles me to go to a couple of events. We'll find out if I actually go to them later on. I gotta go fill out some forms, stand in line a little bit, you know. Filling out forms, standing in line. But today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite characters in Chicago history, Johann Hoch. This is one guy, my plan initially had long been to follow up the H.H. Holmes book with the Johann Hoch book. Problem is, nobody's really heard of Johann Hoch. There hasn't been some massively popular but wildly inaccurate book about Johann Hoch yet. I kind of wish somebody would write one. I'm kind of tempted to just do one myself under another name. Like, William Griffith presents Bluebeard in the White City. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And then I'll write the proper one, too, for far less money. You know. All right, well, Johann Hoch was one of my favorite old-time Chicago serial killers. Let us just jump right in here in media res. Here's Johann Hoch riding on a train talking to Evelyn Campbell. By some accounts, swearing and being awfully offensive while talking to her, but this is a train going from New York to Chicago. 1905. Reporter Evelyn Campbell has just helped to capture Johann Hoch and is now accompanying him on the train back to Chicago with a whole bunch of other reporters and police officers. This is Johann over here on the left. This is one of my favorite little bits that I've uncovered, is the circumstances under which this photo was taken. Johann Hoch was accused of, at this point, of having married about 55 women, several of whom were now dead, and his insistence was, no, I'm just being mistaken for all these other guys. Look, this guy looks like me, this person looks like me. So he gathered everybody up at the jail that he thought looked like him and gathered them for a big group photo and said, gentlemen, you are very lucky. You resemble a very handsome man. All the ladies want to kiss a man who looks like Johann Hoch. Of course, he wouldn't have said it quite like that. He was, all the ladies want to kiss you when you look like Johann Hoch. Or none of the ladies can resist you when you look like Johann Hoch. That is him down there at the bottom left looking like the guy on the Pringles can. But let's back up a little bit. This is kind of like the moment where we go, hang on, record scratch, freeze frame. Yep, that's me all right. You're probably wondering how I got myself into this situation. Well, so we're going to go up to Lincoln Park. It is late 1904 in Lincoln Park. A couple of these houses might have been standing at the time. Most of them would have been new, but right about here, approximately where this alley is, was a candy store at the time that was patronized one day by a guy by the name of Johann Hoch. Now, Johann Hoch had just bought himself a cottage down on Union Avenue. It would have been right across the street from the Disco Salad Bar, where this field is now. And of course, this is right next to the old H.H. Holmes Murder Castle location. But yeah, right about here in this little field, he had just gotten himself this cottage at 63rd and Union, just spitting distance away from the old Holmes Castle. But once he had gotten that place, he took out an ad in the paper, saying a German language newspaper under the matrimonial section, where people would just advertise that they wanted to marry somebody. And he said, I am a man in my 30s, moderately successful, no kids, any takers. Got a letter apparently written by the sister of Marie Walker Hoch, a young divorcee. She's generally described as a widow. She was actually, in fact, a divorcee. Her previous husband had apparently tried to kill her several times. And I tend to be a little bit skeptical about these days from before the no-fault divorce clause. Sometimes the divorce cases would just say whatever they had to say to get through the meeting. In this case, there's actually a point where one of the letters sent to him is in the divorce records. One of the letters is sent to her ex-husband in prison. So Marie, now divorced, was operating a candy store right about where we're standing right here. Johann Hoch came and talked with her, and after about half an hour, he said, I like you, you like me, we can get married then, yeah? And she announced, yes, we are going to get married. He had represented himself with a guy with enough money that she could quit this whole candy business and just move in with him down in 63rd Street. But shortly after the wedding, she took sick. And very shortly thereafter, she died. And ended up buried right around here in Oakwood Cemetery. Exactly where they couldn't tell me, but somewhere over in this section. Possibly they'd give me better information now. The last time I went out to look for it was a time when you couldn't go into the office. It was still under COVID rules. But while the body was still lying on the bed, Hoch proposed to her sister, Emily. And Emily said yes. Initially, she said that she put up a little bit of a fight, but by the time of the funeral, she had made up her mind she was going to be marrying Johann Hoch, her sister's ex, who she had been fighting with on her deathbed quite a bit, while also administering enemas to her. This is a very lurid story. So, shortly after the wedding, Hoch disappeared with all of her money. Now, once this happened, newspapers kind of got wind of it. The way the newspapers always said it happened was they just noticed that there was these burial permit and wedding permit with the same guy in the same week and got a little bit suspicious, found out this woman had been deserted, had already gone to the police, and was arranging to have Marie exhumed from her grave. But meanwhile, this Johann Hoch guy had disappeared. This is an actual picture, kind of a cobbled together one, of the body being exhumed that was in the Chicago Evening American. We've got to cover a little bit about the newspapers of the day and a little bit about the police of the day. The police at the time were under the leadership of Chief Francis O'Neill, who spent more of his time looking up Irish folk songs than he did doing police work, which was probably a better use of his time. Usually the cops of the 1890s, early 1900s, the more they were doing anything besides police work that wasn't actually committing crimes themselves, we were probably in better shape. But nobody really has anything that bad to say about Francis O'Neill. As these things go, he's got a pretty good reputation for a Chicago police officer of his era. But also, his head inspector at the time, later the chief of police himself, was George M. Shippey, a guy who I would describe as a real weirdo with lots of weird ideas, like renting a horse that he thought might magically take him to a murderer. He was already starting to lose his mind at this point, possibly a result of syphilis. But we're going to check a little bit. This is what newspapers had looked like a decade before. This is from the H.H. Holmes scare, when they thought they had found a crematory oven or evidence that there used to be one at the H.H. Holmes place. The Daily Tribune kind of looked like this, just 5 or 6 or 7 columns of news. No pictures or anything like that. Sometimes you might get a drawing. But here's how they looked at the time of the Hoch case. 1904, you suddenly get much bigger headlines that go all the way across the banner. You get night editions. You get pictures all over the place. You get much more lurid headlines. This is Chicago American. You get photographs. This was something that was unheard of in newspapers 10 years ago. There've been a couple of experiments, but you would not normally have seen a photograph in a newspaper 10 years before this. Around the same time, Field in death race to save son shot in mystery, like he could actually do anything to save his son who had been found bleeding of a gunshot wound. But this is the Chicago Evening American. They've got a pretty bad reputation. They were the William Randolph Hearst paper in town at the time. But what I've found digging through old newspapers is Hearst papers are just as accurate as anything else. I mean, minus the Sunday supplements, which in any paper were like the Weekly World News. Much of the reputation that Hearst papers has today really just comes from highly orchestrated smear campaigns by their rival papers at the time. The real difference is in style over not in substance. In fact, their articles tend to be much more detailed. They were much better about bringing in experts and consulting with experts and really trying to get to the bottom of stories. But they took a very activist role in these kind of things, and something that was newspapers were always highly partisan at the time. But having newspapers get involved in charity, newspapers get involved in trying to solve the crimes, having these lurid headlines, it was just too modern for a lot of the papers. They got smeared quite a bit, but one of their reporters was living right here in the Brewster Apartments in Lakeview, the Lincoln Park neighborhood, still standing today. The reporter was a young woman named Nana Springer, officially, but she was writing under the name of Evelyn Campbell. She wrote mostly crime. Well, she'd been off and on doing crime columns. She was also doing things like household advice, whatever came up that week. She'd done like exposés of what really went on at the YMCA. And she got really involved in the Hoch case. As the police started to figure out where this Hoch guy who had deserted his wife might be, she got involved in interviewing ex-wives and interviewing neighbors and interviewing people and trying to dig up these clues, which even had people saying, "Are you following Miss Campbell's Hoch clues? The detectives are." Now, she went down a couple of false alleys in this, made a couple of mistakes, but really did some magnificent work at the same time. We're going to go back a little bit. She said what they uncovered as stories about this guy started to come in was it seemed that he had first come to the United States right around 1895. He had gone to Wheeling, West Virginia and opened a tavern probably about where this is right now. Just about where this thing is. There's a whole neighborhood of houses that look like this. I couldn't find one of them selling for more than $20,000 lately. But here, he met a woman named Carolyn Hoch. She had recently married a guy named Adolf Hoch who worked at a factory. His official cause of death was something to do with his heart, but what everybody believed at the time was he had died of drinking ice water. It was the kind of thing that people believed could happen in those days, that drinking ice water was dangerous. So this was Carolyn herself. This is a couple of old stories about drinking ice water, I think. But in any case, Adolf died. and was able to hastily scrawl out a will. You can see down at the bottom it says Adolf his mark, Hoch. That X is all that he actually signed. Now, he was like convulsing and writhing on the bed. It strains the imagination that he could have actually dictated anything like this. But nobody really argued with it. Carolyn had to put up a couple of bonds, called herself Catherine about half of the time. But right around the time, just a couple of years after his death, Johann Hoch arrived under the name of Jacob Huff. He told everybody when he arrived that he'd been on the Elbe, a ship that had been famously shipwrecked a couple of weeks ago, and this is the time you couldn't just look up the survivor lists. We can get a couple of things about his intake. He actually showed up under the name Jacob Huff, though there was also another guy with the same name, Jacob Schmidt. His actual name is up on the top. So he might have just borrowed a name from somebody he saw on the ship. But he moved to town, opened a pub, gave really easy credit, wasn't making much money, but really was just looking for somebody rich to marry. Carolyn had come into quite a bit of property, so he married her, and quickly had her draw up a will. This is her actual will. Some of these things are going to be on Patreon over the next couple of weeks, on the Holmes and Hoch tier. But there is actually kind of a picture. There's like a couple of piecemeal photographs that are just kind of pasting these things together. There's probably a better one out there somewhere. See, there's a slightly better version. And another slightly better version. A lot of times they just had to cobble things together to get a good picture for the papers at the time. But they started going to church under Reverend Haas, who didn't like Hoch from the very beginning, thought that he seemed like kind of a slime ball. Now, he got very suspicious when Carolyn got really sick. And then Carolyn died. He suspected that she had been poisoned. He said that she had said something like she had been poisoned. Started to investigate. Started going around the drugstores talking about what this Jacob Huff fellow had been buying. But Huff decided that Haas was getting a little too close and faked his death. He walked over to the banks of the Ohio River, took off his clothes and left them there, then sailed away, hoping that everybody would think that he had stripped naked, jumped in the water, and drowned. Here's what the newspaper headline said. It deceived nobody. Absolutely nobody was fooled by this. This is how he would have looked at about the time. Past Reverend Haas wrote to Germany, and I found a couple of things saying what town he came from, managed to piece together that he was just a shoemaker's son who had been a wine merchant over there, was running away from some kind of thing, had a wife already back there. But Hoch, by this time, had already disappeared to Chicago, where he took up a saloon here near Milwaukee and Western, and met another woman named Maria or Catherine, who lived over on Belmont. I'm going to spin around to her place. Now, she was possessed of quite a lot of property. Hoch managed to talk her into marrying him fairly quickly. And so the two were wed, giving us one of the best pictures that we've got of him. She was quite a bit older than he was. And shortly after the wedding, she too got sick. Right down the road from the house was the Kraups funeral home. Now, her minister too got suspicious, tried to stop up the funeral procession, but Hoch showed up with a doctor's certificate saying that she had died of kidney disease. So the funeral proceeded all the way up to Graceland Cemetery. You might remember she was the subject of Find a Grave Friday one time. Heather, yeah, I got a lamb from that place. So, having inherited some more money still, Hoch married a woman by the name of Minnie Rankin. Now, Minnie Rankin had been accused of murder herself a few years before. She herself was married to 2 or 3 guys, including one that she was married to already, though he was allegedly trying to kill her too. She figured out pretty quickly that this Hoch fellow was not on the level, being a swindler herself. You can't swindle a swindler for too long. They had a big fight. She wouldn't give over any of her money to her new husband, and so he just left. So the newspapers were piecing all of these stories together. Trying to sort out fact from fiction was very difficult because Hoch was being blamed for pretty much everybody who had ever abandoned a woman before. But it was right about this time people noticed, hey, that house on Union Avenue by the Disco Salad Bar. They definitely knew there was going to be a Disco Salad Bar there one day. You can't live in a neighborhood and not know that. Was right about where the H.H. Holmes Castle was a few years ago. This got people a little bit suspicious. Like, what if these two knew each other? A guy named M.G. Chappell, who was the skeleton articulator who claimed to buy dead bodies from Holmes to turn into skeletons to sell to medical school, showed up and said, yes, I had recognized that guy anywhere. His stories never actually held up, though. For a while, they thought maybe he was this guy, a very peripheral character in the Holmes story who also had a mustache, I guess. But at the time, they were also saying, well, maybe he was a twin brother of this other Chicago murderer. See? Mustache, mustache. You get mustaches on the father's side, right? Newspapers just like connect the dots with criminals at the time. The story that he was working with H.H. Holmes still goes around quite a bit. You still occasionally see that he might have been connected to Belle Gunness, who had a supposed victim named Justina Leffler, who was attributed to both of the two of them. Though in neither case does it actually work out. Next up, well, he bopped around the country for a while. Married a couple of women in New York, a couple of women in California. Altogether, I can trace about 19 women that he married that I'm pretty sure are actually him. Some of them he acknowledged himself. Other times, he had this habit when he filled out the paperwork, he tended to put his mother and father's actual names in the paperwork. So that's a good way to figure out. He changed his name around constantly, usually borrowing the last name of a woman's previous husband. But over here, not too far away from the eventual candy store, there's a woman named Mary Gerke, also known as Liz Gerke. None of these women had just two names. They all went by 5 or 6 different names. Makes them very difficult to study sometimes. But he married her. She ran a boarding house where he was staying. Incidentally, she also had a stepdaughter who would go on to die in the Iroquois theater fire. But she herself considered herself a spiritualist. She talked Hoch into taking a mail-away course on hypnotism. And inside of this place, when the cops broke in, they found he had left behind a trunk full of magician supplies and a book on hypnotism. This exact book, not this exact copy, but this exact book, the Professor Harridan's complete mail-order course in hypnotism, and even a diploma from the College of Hypnotism. So I'm just going to break away a second here and show you some clips of what it looked like in newspaper offices when it turned out that somebody who had married a whole bunch of people, killed probably a few people, and they were trying to figure out exactly how. When it turned out that somebody like this had some kind of training in hypnotism, the newspaper offices looked like this. About like that, I think. It was like, oh man, we're going to have so much fun telling this story. So they were even saying that he was using a zither. Reverend Haas said he was a great zither player to hypnotize women. This is something that comes up now and then, stories that zithers could hypnotize people. Women swear Hoch was a mesmerist. Hoch, a hypnotist, 26 wives now. And here he is using his magnetic powers. So you see, the guy looked like this. He was a goofball. His personality seemed to change depending on who he was with. You know, he had a technique. Find out what they want, be that guy for a month. Wait, the worst is yet to come. Next up, we find him living in Pullman after deserting Elizabeth Gerke. Didn't end up getting any of his money. Or not much of it. Not much of her money, anyway. If I'm remembering right. But here's the thing. This is a footage from way before I figured out where he had lived in Pullman. But it turned out I was parked right by his old house. Here's a photo by Kristen that makes it look a little bit better. And he was living in Pullman. He was working in the Pullman Works. And met a woman named Anna Hendrickson, also known as Marie Hendrickson, because nobody has just one name in this place. She had just lost her husband. Hoch met her and even paid for a headstone for her previous husband out at Forest Farm Cemetery. We found him for Find a Grave one time, too. And the two went off and got married. He gave his name under his real name now, John Jacob Schmidt. God, I wish the middle name had been Jingleheimer. But at the same time as the stories of Anna being deserted, she said that he'd married her, then borrowed her money to go back to Germany to collect an inheritance, and disappeared. And at the same time, so many other stories came out. There was Martha Herzfeld, turned out to be nothing. Marie Becker, I think that one was real. Sophia Fanke, that kind of disappeared from the news. The story probably didn't work out. But you can see the number just went up to 44. To 16 possible graves filled by Hoch. More likely number is probably about 15. About 5, really. But then, Hoch was captured in New York. He was staying at a boarding house operated by a woman by the name of Catherine Kimmerell. I've got a better picture of her from later on. He had proposed to her, said, hey, marriage is a lottery anyway. Why don't we just hitch our fortunes together? We'll run this place together, you know. But she had read in the papers about that awful man in Chicago. Newspapers all insisted it was in their exact paper. She went to the police, and there's a couple of different stories. The one at the time was the police just waited for him in the sidewalk and then said, hello, Hoch. And he said, yeah, hi. My name's not Hoch, though. Others is they went inside and chatted with him for a while before getting him to admit that he was Hoch. Could have gone either way. But they figured out they had their man, and among his stuff, they found a fountain pen that was loaded up with arsenic. Lots and lots of arsenic. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, these are 3 of his wives. That is Mary Gerke on the left, I believe. Then it's definitely Anna Hendrickson in the middle and Amelia Fisher on the right. Here's Mary when she was younger. Mary Gerke when she was younger. This is sometimes the one on the left is sometimes identified as Minnie Rankin, but I don't believe she was actually present that day. You can kind of match up from other pictures other than the hat that they were wearing. But Evelyn Campbell, the reporter, came up to Anna Hendrickson, who she'd interviewed before, and said, why don't you come to New York with me, and you can identify him, then we'll bring him back. So that's what they did. They took her out to New York City. Evelyn went along with her, wrote up some terrific articles about it, then took him out, dragged out all of the suspects, and she just walked up and said, hello, John. And he said, I'm sorry, Anna. I don't know who you are. And here you can see these pictures. They always have Evelyn in the pictures. You can see she's on the right there. You can see she's standing in the background right there. And meanwhile, this was all written up. But at the same time, they had found, while this was going on, they found arsenic in the body of Marie Walker. So Hoch was hauled back to Chicago, interviewed all the way by Evelyn Campbell, who talked to him. About all she really said at the trial eventually was that she talked to him all the way back, tried to get a confession out of him, apparently even came up to him in the jail and tried to get him to confess one last time, with an offer of some cash. But he never quite went for that. She kind of drifted away from the case after this. But Hoch was taken to the old jail that was behind the courthouse here. Inquest went on for a few days. He would appear at some of it. There he is in the jail. Minnie Rankin had walked in, and they had a fine time calling each other Bluebeards. Mary came in and started yelling and screaming at him. And Amelia forgave him. Now, initially she said, I'm going to get you hanged, but then Inspector Shippey made a little too much noise, perhaps, about saying that she was probably in on the murder of her sister, and then dropped that a bit when he realized they needed her to testify against Hoch. But she decided, no, I'm going to forgive him. I'm taking him back. But Hoch became a real favorite with the jailer. But everybody in there really seemed to like the guy. He was jovial, he was a joker. He had many moods. This is like an album cover. The Many Moods of Johann Hoch. We sat there at the inquest with Inspector Shippey and Coroner Hoffman, who would later be sheriff and later go to jail himself. and was even allowed to go out and wander and have his hair cut and go to restaurants, accompanied by the police, of course, and he was paying for all of this. But he had his hair cut right over in here. People sent him Valentines in the mail. He had a lot of offers of marriage while he was in jail. Newspapers ran things like this: 7 wives tell of methods used. Each one of them said he had some different idea, though a couple of them here mentioned the zither. This was not an original interview they did with all of them. They just culled this from other articles. Just kind of a space filler. Then during his trial, eventually Mrs. H ended up being being the star witness against him. But then as soon as she was done getting him convicted, she went right back to forgiving him. She was at his side all the time, trying to help spare him from the gallows. This is a shot of him while he was in jail. There ended up being a rather long stretch. It took over a year after the conviction. It was almost a year before he was actually hanged. He kept getting delay after delay after delay. He would be right there. They'd have him in the death cell for the night. That was the death cell. Or praying in the library. Or even all dressed up for a march to the gallows when somebody would intervene. There's a guy by the name of Frank Comerford who intervened quite a bit. He was a lawyer whose girlfriend had just interviewed Hoch and decided that he was innocent. And he would go on to be involved in several different Chicago cases. But eventually, right when Hoch was about to be hanged, they ran and talked to Kennesaw Mountain Landis, a judge who was nothing if not unpredictable. And Landis, though, is later find more famous the commissioner of baseball, said, yeah, there's something wrong with the conviction here. If you can get this paperwork done in time for the hanging, you can stop the hanging. This was driving the newspapers nuts. The newspapers had to write a lot of their stories ahead of time. If you really read their stories carefully, sometimes you can see they're not really saying anything. They're describing like what the room looks like where the hanging took place. They're describing what the weather is like. They're describing what the guy has been like in recent days. And we did this on the Patreon a while ago. You can kind of analyze it and go through. It's really interesting. But the Chicago Evening American put out several issues a day. And when they got word that the hanging was delayed, but they had already written up the Hoch hanged article for the out-of-town edition, they really started to sweat. But as soon as they got any more news, there's the 12 o'clock edition, Hoch dressed for the gallows. In the afternoon edition, I'll not hang, says Johann Hoch. Next afternoon edition, Hoch prays as the jailers test the gallows. Then, extra, extra, ask U.S. court to stop hanging. Then finally, Hoch hanged. Now, one of his wives in Philadelphia reportedly waltzed when she found out that the drop had fallen. Knew by a strange blur that the man was dead. We're going to cover Shippey for just a second here. Inspector Shippey, a couple of years later, would shoot a guy who came to his house at night, who he said it was possibly an assassin. We'll never really know because...
Arrived.
Well, he kind of shot first and asked questions later. It's a guy by the name of Lazarus Averbuck. Let's check out some graveyard shots here. Now, initially, Hoch was buried at Dunning. Amelia went around and tried to find somebody who would take his grave for some time, but couldn't really come up with anything. Finally, Dunning agreed to take him. He was initially reported just to be buried at Dunning. I had to take some of the stuff out of the New Ghosts of Chicago edition, because I'd assumed he was still there. But it turned out he was only there for about 48 hours before Elmwood Cemetery out in River Forest said, we'll take him here. He was buried in a term grave, though. He's been redeveloped and buried over now. So it's impossible to pinpoint the exact location of his grave, but he's in here someplace. Somewhere in this general vicinity. And Shippey himself is down at Oak Woods, kind of looking at the space where Marie was eventually interred. And we've also since found a grave for Amelia, his last wife, who went on to live a much longer life. She died here in Chicago, but she briefly married another guy, and ended up making the news after he took her to court, saying that she had beaten him with a half-roasted chicken, and then it went around waving around a rope saying, "This is the rope they used to hang my last husband. And now I'll use it to hang you." This is the big mystery that I just can't quite figure out. I've gone through the trial transcript. I've gone through all of the articles. One thing I can't figure out is whether Amelia might have in fact been in on it. Because I kind of suspect that she might have been. Just a hunch. All right, we're still going through some of the New York American stuff on all of this. I got lots and lots of pictures on it. A letter from Hoch. Another picture of him hanging out with some guys who are just thrilled to be around him. Now, the New York American was the Hearst branch in New York. And I went through at the library a while ago and got all of their stuff. It's the trouble, there aren't a lot of Hearst papers that have really been digitized yet. Which is the same, it's a very important part of newspaper history. They even ran this great thing that was all of the wives at once. I've seen this in a few different places. I got it at the Library of Congress. I had a reel borrowed here in Chicago on interlibrary loan, but then they didn't send the last reel, so I had to go to New York at the New York Public Library. They had it. So I've gathered just about everything that was ever written about this guy now. Now I'm just trying to put all the story together and trying to decide whether I want to bother publishing it or just putting it out myself. But all right, everybody. That went a little bit shorter than I thought it did. I thought this was a particularly long tour, so I kind of blew through parts of it. Well, I'm sure you got all of the regular stuff. Now, you notice there's no actual upcoming tours right now. But if you go to MysteriousChicago.com, all of the October tours are up, including the boat tours and all of the Mystericon tours. Everybody, please jump on those. Don't delay, because the boat tour tickets tend to sell out in the end. Sometimes at the last second, but they tend to do it. I'm really hoping they do it again. But for now, everybody, I will just put the Benny back on. Thanks for staying up late with me tonight. This is actually past my bedtime as well. I am Dandy Business Skeletor, including leather pants, just so you know. And here's Benny Goodman again. We'll just hang out for a bit. And thanks to everybody kicking in a few bucks. Now, trying to put all of this guy's story together is a challenge in 2/3. Separating fact from fiction is tricky, and figuring out what order to tell the story in is really tricky. But I'll manage it somehow or another. Did Hoch have any children? He had a few children back in Germany. I haven't been able to figure out much of what happened to them. Well, thanks, everybody.
Along with a sky of romance above. Alone on this night that was meant for love. There must
Did Hoch know Holmes? I don't think so. I think by the time that by the time Hoch got to the United States, Holmes was already traveling around outside of Chicago. He would have arrived in Chicago right about the time Holmes was first really making the news. Yeah, there were a couple of world wars. Timing would have been right about right. Tricky. I've been through like German language newspapers and everything, trying to find what I can. There is some good stuff in the German papers, but not a ton. Who do I think could play Hoch in a movie? Dennis Franz, maybe. Jason Alexander. In Chaplin's Monsieur Verdot, it's a fairly similar character. So he's on plenty of people's trees on Ancestry, but not actually as a descendant that I could find. Usually it's people who found out that one of their ancestors supposedly married him. Usually it's not someone who really did.
And here's another tune that they'll be playing as long as...
Who's that guy that played Mr. Banks in the original Mary Poppins? He could do it. Good night, Mom. There's a lot of differing accounts of what was going on with his family back in Germany. There's a few of them I think are probably more accurate than others, but it's hard to know. Their last name was Schmidt. It's not a terribly uncommon name in Germany. Makes it a little tricky. I mean, the place where they lived, Bingen on the Rhine, was small enough that you can sort out quite a bit. Well, Dick Van Dyke played the guy who ran the bank, and Bert. How about this news from Carrie back there? Miles has been making the rounds. He was here earlier. Oh yeah, marriage, and then it sounds like it was a blast back then. Well, you'd just join yourself a couple of secret societies and lodges so your wife couldn't ask you where you were going. Or if you were a woman, you'd join the Order of the Eastern Star or something. Good night, Susan. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, this is my business Skeletor outfit. I got the room almost clean enough. David Tomlinson. Yeah, no, not available. I didn't suppose he was. I really don't stay up that late much these days. How's Lily doing? Lily is great. Lily spends most of her time in Ronnie's office. Unless there's food coming out, and then in case she runs for it. Now and then I'll see her batting a mouse around. Tomorrow, I think we're going to say Find a Grave is going to be at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And I got PBS coming to film in my place in the morning.
Sings once more, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo.
It's been a busy day, it feels like. Tomorrow's also whiskey and a cookie. I'll pop in, but I think I gotta do. Feels like a slow news week anyway. Laura, they should. We need to get permission from the cemetery, though. That could be a trick. Yeah, PBS is doing a new show about Chicago mysteries that'll be out in March. And I've filmed several segments with them and Jeff Bayer. But I got a good idea for Find a Grave tomorrow. It's going to be a tricky one, but I know it can be done. I might have to, like, coax you through it. If it hollers, let it go, let it fly away. Alright, good night. I see a lot of people are saying good night. Thank you guys for tuning in late tonight. I know it's a little unusual. This is past my own bedtime too, but we'll also be doing some late ones in Mystericon. So I really gotta like reset my clock, my internal compass, whatever you call it. But thanks everybody for joining me. Thanks to everybody who's kicking in. Join the Patreon. If you are not on the Patreon, lots of cool stuff coming up on the Patreon, I can tell you right now. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I will see you tomorrow, Find a Grave Friday, late at 1 p.m. because of the filming commitments. But it's going to be really cool. So thanks for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody. Yeah!